switched.
We switched seats. We started late, and my head's cut off. Hold on a second.
No, you're good.
There we go. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on Bold. Sorry
Welcome
to start
to the
a little
internet.
bit late. Yes, we are. We're coming to you live about 5 minutes late. Make sure you're liking us on Facebook and Twitter. And what do? You do the social media. I don't understand.
Yeah, no. Make sure that you follow us on Bold TV. Make sure that it's Facebook.com/Bold TV. We're on Periscope. It's Bold Global Media. We're on Instagram, Bold TV.
Lots of stuff.
All that good stuff.
So big news week. What happened? I really didn't pay attention to the news this week. Sorry.
Well,
it's just too much.
But it's like news overload every week, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the big stories is we know Kim Kardashian was successful in what she did.
As it should be.
Yeah.
As Kim Kardashian should be. Donald Trump pardoned the person who Kim Kardashian, the grandmother who Kim Kardashian went in to lobby for her release, her commutation of her sentence and whatnot.
Have you met Kim Kardashian?
I have not, thankfully. But also, he did a few other pardons this week, too. He pardoned several other people, and I can't remember who they are. Who else did they pardon? Let's bring in our good friend. We are on it today. We are so on it. Let's bring in our good friend Scotty Nell Hughes is here.
Hello. Well, I'm going to give you the breaking news. It's being reported by The Hill right now. Muhammad Ali is actually who Donald Trump just this morning is considering giving a pardon to.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you get a pardon. You get a pardon.
That's exactly what it is.
I'm going to get a pardon.
Who else did he pardon this week? He pardoned some other folks this week, earlier in the week.
He's pardoned several people recently. He pardoned Scooter Libby. He pardoned.
Good Lord, someone in production
No, he
find
pardoned.
out who he
Who else did he
pardoned.
pardon?
Well, you had the sheriff from
Joe
Arpaio.
That was a
this
while
week
ago.
he pardoned some
Well,
folks.
he was talking also. Blagojevich was the other one.
Blagojevich. We talked about Blagojevich and Martha Stewart.
He hasn't. Martha Stewart. He hadn't yet.
But pardons are a big thing. Why is he pardoning so many people? What's the thing? What's the deal, Scotty?
Well, I think he just found out that he has the power to do it.
Is that what it is?
I honestly think he went, wait a minute. It's nothing against him. I mean, presidents have pardoned all sorts of people. The key to this, which I think he's opening Pandora's box. Who needs a lawyer? Just get your favorite celebrity to go advocate for you. And I think he needs to also make sure we have over 300 military servicemen who are under bars because of military supposed war crimes that are not necessarily. Let's go and look at those that are less known. Not everybody has access to Kim Kardashian.
Right.
And I think that's the unfortunate precedent that we're opening with this. He's going to now have a long list of folks that he needs to review in deciding whether or not they get it.
Well, do you think at all that he's doing this, either one of you, that he's doing it to some degree to signal? I mean, I'm not saying I believe it, but some people believe it, that he's doing it as a signal to those folks who are under investigation by Robert Mueller, who have been charged by indicted by Robert Mueller, that pardons are on the table, that I have this. I remember I have the power. Do you think that has anything to do with it? Is that a strategy?
I would say yes and no, but really more no, because in all of these people getting pardons, you did not have his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, mentioned. If anybody needs a pardon right now that's probably going to jail, it's Paul Manafort, and yet President Trump didn't mention him. So I don't know if he's going to bring this internally.
Yeah, well, the big pardon, and actually, I think why we didn't. We will get into it more later. Was the pardon of Dinesh D'Souza?
That's the one you were
thinking. We will get into it.
Yes, but they're all media people,
later in the
right?
show.
They're all big media names.
They're all, and half of them were on The Apprentice. I mean, they're all people that he knew.
I could have totally ripped the tag off so many mattresses and been pardoned for it all.
No, you probably would not get pardoned, Clay, for that. He probably would let you sizzle.
What else happened this week? Immigration's been a big hot
There was
button
a
this
big
week.
flare-up in the House, so the more moderate or middle-of-the-road wing said they were going to work with the Democrats and force a vote. They're trying to get all the signatures they need in order to force a vote, 218 signatures. They said by Tuesday is their deadline. And allegedly behind closed doors, they met with the Freedom Caucus and said that they had come up with a deal to have some sort of pathway to citizenship through a new visa bill. And then the House Freedom Caucus comes out and says, no, we didn't say that, and we never agreed to it. So it's all kind of back to square one. But Scotty, since you were one of the grassroots activists who helped propel Trump to victory, do you think that the Freedom Caucus would ever have any sort of pathway? And I guess here's my question. Is there an in-between to have maybe some sort of legal protection that wouldn't put them at the front of the line, but just have them go in the same line as everybody else, but still offer some sort of protection? Is that the middle ground?
We need immigration reform. We need, instead of people going through, literally jumping through hurdles through years of the legal system to become legal citizens. That is wrong. That needs to be reformed. But let's call it for what it is. This is an election year. Immigration to Republicans, I mean, build the wall helped get President Trump elected. When they're just talking about this right now, I really doubt we're going to see any any action as long as all of them are on the ballot in November. You're going to see a lot of talk, but not a lot of substance behind it.
So you're validating a fear that I have, and a lot of people do.
You're welcome.
Which is essentially that Congress doesn't necessarily want to get stuff done because they want to keep things to run on. I mean, what is that?
But that's called getting reelected. And unfortunately, so many times the American people continue to fall for it because we keep reelecting these folks. This is why a lot of us are pushing for term limits right now for Congress. If these folks knew that they had to actually get something done while they were there and that would be their legacy, maybe they might do it.
But isn't that the gridlock because the people were elected and the people who were elected can't agree? Because you had people who elected the Freedom Caucus, you had people who elected Democrats. And since those individuals can't agree, isn't that actually the will of the people in the sense that there is no consensus at this point?
The Republicans are the majority in the House and the Senate. We have the White House. There's no reason why we are not getting immigration reform
But there are
passed.
enough more moderate districts of people who were elected to say, hey, there should be some sort of compromise, right?
There should be something.
Where's the bigger divide? Is the bigger divide between Republicans and Democrats, or is it between Republicans and Republicans? Which, for immigration, it seems like the bigger issue may be within the party.
Well, we're always focusing on the illegals crossing over the borders. We're not focusing on the people that are in the system right now that are taking years for. I think if Republicans switch their focus, say, you know what, let's reform those who really want to be legal citizens and are starting that process, I think that would be a winning message for the Republicans right now. And it would show that we do want positive immigration reform.
And a lot of people think that if Donald Trump came out for whatever, his folks would just follow him and agree with him. So he does have a certain amount of power. He could say, you know what, I want to do this. I want to handle the people who are here and deal with that. And I think some of these folks might. But
not as big as Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, as this week has proven, because Kanye has already justified Donald Trump's power, according to...
I told you already validated one fear. Don't validate another one, Scott.
Well, let's move to some breaking news overnight. There was reports at 61 years old, sadly, that Anthony Bourdain committed suicide in France. This is just heartbreaking, and this is on the heels of Kate Spade earlier this week, also allegedly committing suicide. We just want to take the moment. We're putting the phone number up on our Facebook and also here on the show to put just the phone number of who to call if you or someone you know is dealing with depression or anxiety. There are resources. You can call the suicide prevention line. This is just a tragedy, and it's I think it's worth talking about their legacies and what they did for the world. And I don't know.
The suicide rate was twice last year what the homicide rate was.
And exactly. It's really growing, especially among younger people. So I think there's this crisis of meaning where people are feeling trapped. They're feeling anxiety. What do you think's driving this increase in suicides?
Well, you look at Kate Spade, you look at Anthony Bourdain, people look at them on the surface. They were smiles, they were traveling, they looked happy. That's what I think what we've done is unfortunately we've become a very superficial society that we always have to look positive, that bad things aren't happening to us, and we have to put a smile on our face. My suggestion, even before calling the crisis line, right now, go call your friends and your family, and even the ones that you consider to be the happiest. We all have trials and tribulations in our lives, and the reason how some people make it through it is because of the support system around them, whether it is just a phone line or your friends. I think that's it. But we're finding out both Anthony and Kate Spade were very lonely in their life, that they didn't have people they could trust. I think this is where you really need to just take a minute and value those people around you and check in with them in a sincere, I see the smile on your face, but I know last year someone passed away close to you, or I know you lost your job. I know you broke up. Really go in depth with them. This is a good opportunity for us to really value those that are here.
Well, and Clay, from working in Hollywood, the pressure to have that superficial shine.
Clearly, I didn't do it.
No, as far as people in the business. Can you talk about that dichotomy? Like friends that have you seen friends who have gone through something dark and they've come through on the other side? And what about that tension between the public image and the private struggle?
I mean, I haven't necessarily, fortunately. My sister committed suicide many years ago, and it was a very different situation than what we've seen in the past few years. But I mean, I haven't seen anyone personally in the last 5-10 years that has gone through that. But I do agree with what Scotty says. I mean, I think there is a lot of superficiality. I hadn't thought about it that way until you mentioned it. But there is this, I was just reading something. This is totally kind of off topic, but I was reading something yesterday about how this Instagram culture has forced a lot of male celebrities in Hollywood to become even more physically a certain way, because you turn on you look at Instagram and you've got girls and guys who are taking pictures of themselves half dressed and they all look very good, and to be a celebrity, to stand out, you have to be even better than that. So there is I think a constant pressure to always do better. And sometimes I think the struggle becomes, for those folks who are at the top of their game, like, what do you do next? Like, how can I go beyond winning an Emmy, beyond being a world-class designer? I mean, I think there's always a struggle in different ways than people.
Clay, you brought up a very good point. You don't know anyone that's come in the last 5 years. I guarantee you know people who have thought of it.
Yeah.
Because we've all go through hell. And you all have those thoughts of how can I escape? You feel overwhelmed.
And everybody always says, I had no idea, right?
I had no idea. So I guarantee every person that's watching the show right now knows somebody that has thought of it. And it might be very surprising who that might be. And it's not, they just cannot handle the pain anymore, or seeing those around him handle their pain. They feel like a burden. So that's why I said it's more important right now that you do value those people and take that time. Because you'd be surprised. We say it's amazing what a smile can do. A smile can really change a person's world right now. It's a matter of life and death.
And a kind word, and letting people know that it's not about what is superficially shown. It's really about what's inside. I wish there was a competition for showing just how kind or compassionate you are.
Because you would win, Carrie.
I don't know.
You would win.
No, I'm just saying on Instagram, that's what really matters. That's what's inside. But on Instagram, it's just about your.
Shallow out. It's shallow out all over
Clay
again.
has a six-pack ab, and he's also very kind. I mean, he's got it both.
It's under there somewhere. Well, Scotty Nell Hughes, thank you very much, and thank you for sharing that message that I think we needed people to hear. So
it's personal, so I completely understand.
Thank you, Scotty. Come back and see us.
Thank you.
It's been a very sobering week in that regard, right? Because we have seen that, and not to bring we certainly don't want to bring the show down in any way, but it is an incredibly important thing, and I'm glad you brought it up, and we talked about it, and Scotty shared too, because you always hear people say, "I had no idea," and you know, Anthony Bourdain is somebody who is at the very top of his game, Emmy wins constantly. He was in the middle of filming a show, and so Scotty's right. You really don't know, so make sure you take an opportunity to connect with those folks who you love, even if you don't think that they're the type of person who might be in that struggle. So let's talk about other struggles for a second. I don't know. I'm always in charge of doing the transitions. I don't know how to transition out of that.
That was a struggle.
But we'll try to talk about a completely different struggle. We're talking about struggling politicians in midterm races. Oh, that was okay. That was not bad. Gavin Wax is a partner at Workville Group. And my favorite, Alicia Neal, is here. She's a friend of our show. She's a friend of mine. She's a documentary maker. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Midterms, that's all we're talking about all year, right? California was probably the biggest, most newsworthy midterm that happened this week. On Tuesday, they voted. And there was a lot of stress amongst both parties, I think, but especially amongst Democrats, because California has this different system. You don't run in a Democrat primary or a Republican primary. It's a race, and the top two vote getters get to go on. And I guess a lot of people thought that, oh no, Democrats, there's so many on the boards here that they may cancel each other out, and some of these places will get two Republicans. That doesn't seem to have happened. I don't even know what the first question here is, because that hasn't happened, but I'll ask you, Lisi, why do you think that so many Democrats decided to get on the ballot, even though, and some of them refused to step off, even though they recognized that this was a major threat for the party?
The same, because this is emblematic of this battle for the soul of the Democratic Party, right? Which I think we've talked about before. So we talk about this battle between liberals, meaning traditional establishment Democrats, versus leftists, which is the Bernie Sanders populist wing, which is, I guess, similar to the whole thing you have with the Tea Party and the conservative movement. So, there still is this struggle within the party, and that's very similar to when many people were asking Bernie to step down, when it was clear that Hillary Clinton would be the nominee, with the belief that he was bringing the party down. It was creating divisiveness. But this struggle still has not been solved, which is why you have a number of people with different ideologies within the liberal spectrum coming up and still wanting to take control of the party, even though the establishment looks like, especially with these latest results, that they pretty much establishing their control.
But Gavin, that didn't seem to be, I mean, the first of all, Democrats didn't block themselves out of any of those races in California. And across the board, for the most part, it tended to be that establishment Democratic wing. It wasn't that leftist Bernie wing that won most of the races. Does that concern Republicans? Is that a wake-up call for Republicans that maybe we need to start looking at finding moderate candidates as well? Or
right, it's district by district. I mean, at the California state level, you have De Leon running against in a Democrat versus Democrat state level Senate race. In that case, it's probably for the best, and I think you would probably agree, to have two Democrats, to have a more progressive wing of the party in these congressionals, many of them that Hillary carried in 2016, more of a moderate, definitely more towards the center, will probably be in the Democrats' best interest. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. But as you were saying, the party in California is probably 10 years ahead of the National Democratic Party in terms of their ideology and the shift. And you saw it. She was one of the first incumbent senators in recent memory who did not win her party's endorsement. So it's saying a lot. And
Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a microcosm of what we're seeing across the country, and it's sort of a forewarning of what we're going to see, in a few cycles down the line. So it's definitely interesting. But on the ground in these races, I think overall the 7 battleground seats that were being discussed, roughly, I think the Republicans are in an okay position. They did okay. Sure, there were no shutouts in favor of them, but the fact that was even being discussed. And the Democrats, I think, had to spend around $7 or $8 million just to make sure that they had candidates in the running. Doesn't bode too well for their plans to retake the House.
Well, and Gavin,
we'll
I want to ask Elise this question because, to your point, California turnout was really strong for Republicans. And in fact, 6 out of 7 of those races that you mentioned, Gavin, Republicans had a higher turnout. Is this because Republicans are more motivated because they see the policy wins, like they're not tired of winning yet? They came out. I understand the infighting. I understand the infighting on the left in terms of, the soul of the Democratic Party, but there was all the talk of the blue wave. And so the question is it now going to be just a blue ripple or a blue trickle?
I think it's way too early to predict that, And I mean, polls have consistently shown, yes, the turnout was pretty high, but polls have consistently shown that, especially when it comes to the midterm elections, that Democrats are much more motivated than Republicans. I think it's by 63 to 40-something% chance of actually going to the polls and voting, people that are likely to vote. So we are seeing this quote unquote love resistance, the impact of Trump's policies really, really energizing the party like it never has before. I still think it's too early to tell. And I was actually talking to Gavin about this, that the conversations about policy and messaging, I think, are more, how do I put it, more essential in a way, because it makes me wonder if, like Democrats have come out with this new, a better deal, and whether that's even going. Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Clay. You did not even need to say anything. They didn't see the look, but the look said it all. And
it was a little eye roll. It was a little eye roll.
It was a pretty big eye roll, which is my eye roll too. And the question is, will that be enough to get people out, or is it going to be anti-Trump? Trump sucks. Trump sucks. Trump is terrible.
Well, the blue wave. We've seen that number. I mean, on the generic ballot, we've gone from Democrats having double-digit leads over Republicans to now, I think the most recent one is 9. But what's really interesting to me is that the president's approval rating is going up.
Yes.
It's continuing to edge up. I think it's now equal with where President Obama and President Bush were at this point in their terms, in their first terms. But at the same time, the NBC Wall Street Journal poll this week was showing the president's approval ratings up, showing the generic ballot coming closer, but at the same time having these enormous gaps in those who said that they wanted to vote for a candidate specifically because they were a check on the president. So specifically this was amongst Democrats and Republicans too, obviously more for Democrats, but that I think in the 80% range that they wanted someone who would be a check on the president and that would motivate them. What does that do, A, for Republicans when they have to run against Democrats? And B, what does it do for Republicans within the party, incumbents, who are maybe running in a primary and having to decide whether or not they want to support the president or call him out?
Right. I mean, there's a few things there. I'll say one, this whole blue wave is sort of like someone who peaked in high school. It's going to fade away by the time it matters. It's talked about. The generic ballot generally favors Democrats. Going back to 2002, Republicans have always outperformed the generic ballot. That's something to be said. And let's also remember, it's a 2-year cycle. So these incumbents that we're discussing, these current congressmen, congresswomen, they ran with Trump at the top of the ticket. They ran with Hillary on the top of the ticket, bringing out the vote, and they were still able to hold on. So I think, in cases like in California and elsewhere, if they were able to survive in 2016, I think it's a safe bet to say a lot of these incumbents will be able to survive going into 2018.
Despite the fact that generally the first midterm is never good for the president's party.
Right. I mean, everyone tries to make these macro-level assumptions. I think all politics is local, as cliched as it sounds. I mean, in cases where, like a Darrell Issa, there is no incumbent, sure, there's definitely some concern there. In cases like Pennsylvania with the redistricting, sure, you can't really look at past races. It's a whole different demo. It's a whole different audience. But I think if the district has stayed the same, you have an incumbent, and based on these primary results in California, I think the Republicans will be okay.
Listen, I'll tell you what, I'm the first Democrat to say I don't think this blue wave is going to be as big as people are saying it will be, but you are far more optimistic than I would be if I was a Republican. I'll give you that.
Look, I see the Senate and the House being the exact opposites. In the Senate, you have a clear Republican advantage just because the amount of seats the Dems hold in states that Trump won being up. On the flip side, in the House, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's 23 seats, which is their margin of seats that Hillary won.
We were debating whether it's 23 or 24.
Yeah.
It's 23.
It's 23.
I read
It's
the
a
Wall
lot,
Street Journal this
23
morning.
and 2 Senate seats.
Right.
Right.
It's 10 Senate seats that Trump won.
5 by double
but then
digits.
2
Yeah.
that they have.
But 23 on the House that Hillary won.
Proportionally,
Yes.
it's exactly the opposite. So it's an interesting year because I think in the Senate, I'll make a bet right now. The Republicans will hold it. They'll probably make decent gains there. The House, it's definitely up in the air. They may lose seats, but is it enough to get the Democrats in control?
Well, Gavin, you just made a bet, and we had someone from 528 or 538.
I believe you've made bets or two, a few bets in your life
This
too,
is fair.
Carrie.
No, I'm saying he wouldn't make a bet. So you were bold and made a bet. So thanks, Gavin, on your first
But
time
I
here on
have
Bold.
actually-
We got to wrap.
You have to
yes.
wrap, okay.
But put your comments. Let's keep going. Let's duke it out, Alicia. Also,
Alicia will be back.
We talk about
Yes,
this a lot.
of
The
course.
economy, it's doing well. Who knows? That bodes well for Trump.
all right.
But I've still got hope, girl.
Yeah, we gotta have it.
Kevin Wags, thanks so much for being here with us.
So,
Come back and see us.
Thank you for
definitely.
having me.
Are you going to go along with that? You think are you as optimistic as he is?
For me, it's too early to say because things can change on a dime.
Oh, yeah.
As we know, the president's
Right.
approval
But
rating
if the vote was held
fluctuating. A lot. If it was held today, I think what Gavin said makes sense. But I'm not going to go that far because it's not held today.
I mean,
so,
what he said makes sense, and logically it does, and I agree with him. But I got to say, you look at that race in Missouri. The state Senate race in Missouri, where for the first time just north of Kansas City, a Democrat won a state house or state Senate race. So that enthusiasm is still there, and it may not be easy.
I think it's there in some districts.
We couldn't
and
predict.
I think that's
we couldn't predict the presidential race accurately because people are doing these big nationwide polls. He said, politics is local, but the reason we couldn't predict is because that's not how we elect a president. We elect a president state by state, and had we done those
precinct
polls in
by
states, right?
Yep.
Had we been doing, had these big generic ballot polls been being taken on a local level, we might see a completely different picture. So,
they got to change the methodology.
I'm holding out hope.
Yes. Well, we got a video here to introduce our next guest. She's Deb Mashuk. She's the executive director of Heterodox Academy. Let's roll the tape here to get some more context on what they're doing.
You see the sort of equivalent of inquisitions going on at many institutions where people are hauled before tribunals, where all they've really done is to question some orthodoxy.
Shouting profanities in the faces of faculty members or administrators who have angered a group of students because they've taken a position that the students don't like. Somebody should be saying, come on, it's a part of the price of being in this community that we treat each other with a modicum of respect.
If you don't agree with what somebody's saying, you don't shout them down. You make an argument for what you think.
Don't try to silence them, that's never going to be effective, but train yourself to engage with them.
It happens almost everywhere that nobody is penalized for using force or the threat of force to shut down somebody else. And that means that the right of speech has been taken away.
We know that in other countries,
So that's a very
stuff.
sober video,
right?
but I mean, it's important work. So we'll bring in our guests. So Deb is with Heterodox Academy. They specialize in increasing and encouraging viewpoint diversity and constructive disagreement within universities. Deb, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
How in the world do you do it? I mean, I watched that, and I as I was watching it, I'm sitting here thinking, how much of it is chalked up to just, I don't want to use the word immaturity, but I can't think of one yet. But the fact that kids who are in universities at that age, they're still in some way having their freedom for the first time. They're finding their place in the world to some degree. How do you bottle that into a more productive dialogue when that's not necessarily naturally what kids do at 19 years old?
Well, it's not what any of us do. So we're all very tribal creatures. This is not just a developmental thing. We're seeing it not just in the colleges and universities, but in the broader social context, as I've heard you discuss here before as well. And so in terms of how to bottle it and how do we shape shape the habits of heart and mind to enable that constructive disagreement across differences, I think it comes down to empathy, knowing that other people have a reason for their perspectives, curiosity. So when you encounter someone who sees things differently, to lean in and say, tell me how you got there. Why do you think that? And also intellectual humility. The chances that any one of us have been uniquely ordained to somehow get everything right about everything. I guarantee it wasn't me, and it probably wasn't either of you either. And so when we start at this place of we're surely wrong about something, then it opens the door for dialogue and engagement and figuring out why do we think differently, and what is the value in engaging with others who see things differently?
So Heterodox Academy, you guys go to college campuses and you work with professors. I know you guys work with Berkeley, because Berkeley was where, in the video, they had rioters, people burning stuff down because they didn't want conservative speakers coming to campus. You guys went in afterward and said, okay, here's a framework. How does that exactly work when you're working with the universities, and how do the professors respond? Do they realize they have a bias? Are they open to what you're saying? I mean, obviously they brought you in, so how does that process work?
So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and as you said, we're focused on viewpoint diversity and mutual understanding and constructive disagreement. And how we do it is we do a lot of research, both empirical and qualitative, to figure out what are the trends, what's happening, and try to bring some understanding. And so we do a lot of writing, and we don't necessarily go in as the fixers, but we want to engage and offer another framework for thinking about these issues, and not demonizing anyone and not trying to shame anyone, but really saying, for the sake of education, for the sake of creating new research and understanding, that we need to be in dialogue together.
So how much of this is the responsibility of the students who are trying to, writing obviously is a horrible thing to do, not the way to handle stuff. How much of it is that the responsibility of the students versus the responsibility of the school? We've seen some schools that have canceled appearances by certain figures because the students reacted violently or loudly. Is it the responsibility of the school to listen to their views and cancel those things, or is it their responsibility to make sure they still go forward? What do you think?
So I've spent 13 years as a professor of psychology out at Harvey Mudd College, so I know the academic life. I love the academy, and my thinking on this is when we step foot onto the college campus, we're all part of a community of learners, and thus we have a shared responsibility to open inquiry, to doing the hard work together. So yes, administrators need to be setting expectations and a sense of what are the principles by which we decide what ideas can come to campus and whatnot. And students, I think, should absolutely be part of that consideration and part of that dialogue, that it's really the shared communal responsibility.
But schools tend to be, I'll admit it, a lot of universities tend to be pretty progressive bastions.
Although I will point out, recently Liberty University, which is a conservative school, just shunned a liberal Christian pastor. So it definitely happens.
Oh no, yeah, it happens in both places.
We got to call it out wherever it's happening.
But is there a you know, I don't even know if I know what the question here is, but they tend to be more progressive bastions. Do they?
Well, I think part of it. Here's my question.
Yeah,
it's just. It seems that people hire, and this is what the data shows, is that people tend to hire people who are like themselves. Yeah. It happens in business, and it happens in academia. So it becomes this self-reinforcing bubble. Are you guys helping with their hiring process of how they vet people, how they think about it? So I'm just thinking of, I went to Harvard for my master's, and I'm just thinking, I had some professors who I was afraid to open my mouth on campus. Because I knew what they would say. And anytime, there was one course that I took on presidential history, and this professor was incredibly liberal, and anytime libertarian economics came up, he would just literally mock it. And there was no room for me to ever raise my hand without him ridiculing me. Because I knew what would happen.
Bitter over this,
no, so I guess my question is, do you guys work on the hiring process to make sure that intellectual history and theory is understood, let alone hired?
Yeah, so I tell you, as soon as we start focusing on teaching students what to think instead of how to think, we're in trouble. So, we don't advocate setting particular quotas or whatnot, but what we strongly advocate is we need to break out of orthodoxies. So if there's really in a classroom or on a campus just one right way of thinking about things, and anyone who asks questions or who makes comments or a student who writes a paper that's at odds with that orthodoxy, if that person fears a censure from peers or from professors, we're silencing inquiry, learning has halted, and that puts all of us in pretty dire straits.
We're going to have to go in a second, but you have a conference coming up.
We do. We have the HXA Open Mind Awards and Conference coming up next week. It'll be here in New York City. Unfortunately, registration is full, but we invite people to attend the full conference with us via live stream, available through our Facebook page and on our webpage.
And it's awards. What are the awards announced, or is it private who you're going to announce?
Yeah, the awards have been announced. And I did bring a list because I was, oh my gosh, I don't want to forget anyone. So the Institutional Excellence Award will be going to the University of Chicago. The Leadership Award will be going to Robbie George and Cornell West. The Courage Award, Alice Drager, Exceptional Scholarship for Tanel Porter and Karina Schumann's article on how to cultivate intellectual humility. Outstanding Student Group, Bridge USA. Outstanding Students, Lindsay Shepard and Zachary Wood.
So congratulations to all of them for doing, for encouraging dialogue on both sides.
And it's hard work, and so we honor these individuals and all the other campuses and professors out there who are doing this work.
Thank you very much. Deb Mashik, thanks so much for joining us. Come back and see us.
We'll
tune into your live stream. You can find out, we'll put that links and all that stuff on bold.global and on our Facebook page, so you can find out how you can snoop in on their conference.
Snoop, I like that.
Yes, I'm good at that. I will admit, I'll be the one person who will admit that progressive universities tend to be more progressive. I can be biased and say I think that's because there's an enlightenment that comes with that, that progressive thoughts come with. But I'm one of those folks who gets very concerned when a school like Berkeley knocks someone like me.
Well, especially where that's where free speech started in the 60s. Right. So Kathleen Klein says, agree, let's not silence each other. Cheyenne Reed says, it is so important to have diverse conversation, understand each other so we can be united, especially in our differences. So
Denise Halliday Koch says, good morning, Bold. Great to see you, Clay. Why reversing seats?
Because, it's a secret.
Well, I'll tell you, because I talk too much. And I talk over Carrie when I don't see her. So I said this morning, let's switch so I can see you and I don't interrupt you all the time. I'm bad about that. It's all about not silencing anyone's views. That's why we switch seats,
there you go.
We're going to bring in our next group. Our next guest, Cabot Phillips, is the media director at Campus Reform. And Stanley Fritz is back with us. He's a campaign manager at Citizens Action of New York. Thanks, guys, so much, both of you, for being here with us. We were just talking a little bit about campuses. Campus Reform is necessary. What do you guys do at Campus Reform?
So we cover bias on college campuses, specifically liberal bias that we see from administrators, from professors, whether it's conservative student groups not getting the same funding that liberal groups are getting, whether it's speakers being overwhelmingly of one political ideology, and whether it's in the classroom where professors are, I like what Deb said about teaching people what to think and not how to think, and I think that's an important thing. We're trying to hold people accountable on both sides. Wherever there is bias, create an example or on a college campus where it's a marketplace of ideas where people are able to think freely, have a debate, a dialogue. So I've been on probably 100 college campuses in the last year and a half or so, speaking to students about free speech, trying to get them to open up their minds and be open to dialogue and debate. You don't have to agree with everyone. You don't have to agree with me, but just have those tough conversations and make up your mind for yourself.
Yeah, well, and Cabot, that's a perfect segue because we brought you guys both here because we want to talk about the conversation and how to think about how should movements think about the more kind of extreme elements of the conversation. So Cabot, we'll put some tweets up before Roseanne Parr put her infamous tweet. You cautioned conservatives about using her as a conservative champion. And can we play that clip?
To see that. I would caution conservatives, though, against holding up Roseanne all of a sudden as this conservative, champion for them. I think, there have been some comments in the past where, maybe she's not always aligned with the conservative movement. I think some people are just assuming that they want to hold her up now.
Well, you called that one. I had to tell them.
So I guess in the spirit of Heterodox Academy, which is encouraging viewpoint diversity and all people to the table, where does a movement run the risk, though, of embracing someone like Roseanne and then only to find her saying horribly racist things, and then you have to distance yourself? Well, to get on the left as well, we'll bring Stanley in, but since we just played Cabot's clip.
For Roseanne, for example, I think a lot of Americans, and especially a lot of conservatives, they seek validation from people they see in the media, on TV, and movies. And I think a lot of conservatives feel like they're underrepresented in Hollywood. And so the first time they ever get someone that they think they can relate with in some way, they want to cling to them and say, look, we got someone in Hollywood who's famous, agrees with my viewpoint, and it makes people feel validated. I think it's the same reason people seek out media sources that reinforce their own beliefs rather than challenge them because they want to feel smarter. They want to feel like other people agree with them. And when it comes to, embracing extremist ideologies and extremist people within the movement, it is dangerous because it's easy to fall prey to that because you see people on the fringes of each side, and it's easy to take the fringe of the other side and say, look, that's everyone who I disagree with. That's, paint that broad brushstroke with those people.
But Stanley, don't we run the risk a lot of hitching our wagon to the stars of folks, not just like Roseanne. I mean, listen, I'll also say Roseanne was very progressive when she was on in the 80s and 90s, so you saw that one coming. But we do risk of hitching our wagon to those stars who, based on one or two things they've said. I mean, this is a culture where we see a 180, 240 now tweet, and we identify that person's viewpoints based on the one thing they said. Where's the danger in that? Are there any progressive icons that we think of that perhaps may not be the most responsible people to look up to? And how do we stop people from having this mindset of, okay, I saw someone say something on Twitter and therefore I'm going to follow them blindly?
So first of all, thanks for having me again. I do want to mention that it's really important to give space for everyone to debate. Iron sharpens iron. But you get in danger when you start dealing with people who are racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, or just demagoguing people. And it's like you said on Twitter, it's very easy to see one or two clips of someone saying something and being really empowered by it. But if you look under the hood, it's not that good. So Bill Maher, for example, he's someone who I used to love this show, turn to HBO on my friend's account because I'm too poor to have it, and, laugh at him being an armchair liberal. And then he said he was an N-word lover. And then he said some very problematic things about Muslim people. And you start to realize that this is a kind of dangerous person that kind of disguises themselves in ideology. And it's really important for folks to not just look at those one or two clips, but to really pay attention to the deeper person. Because as you mentioned on that clip, Roseanne, yeah, she's for Trump, but if you look under the hood, she's an anti-Semitist, and she's also racist. And it wasn't a secret. People just didn't look enough.
Well, so let me push back on that and ask you how, because I sometimes feel like we look at the words too much versus the actions. And somebody, just to be a devil's advocate, might say, yeah, Roseanne said some abhorrent things. Yeah. And everything that she said in that tweet and many of the things she said in the past would make me think that she's a racist. But are there people, I mean, Joy Reid's been in the news quite a bit recently because Joy Reid got in trouble has gotten in trouble recently for things she said on her blog back in 2006, 2005. But a lot of the people who work with her now say she may have said those things, but that's not how she behaves. That's not how she treats people around her. Are we as a society putting too much focus on the words of some people versus the actions of them? Do you think that that's a problem?
Yes and no. So in Joy Reid's case, I think she was very open about being apologetic of the things she did do wrong. And, from what I've seen, she is trying to do better. I think we have to give people space to improve and to redeem themselves, and we're not doing. We're in the mode of canceling everyone. Everyone's canceled on Twitter. Now, there are some people, and I think Roseanne would fit into that description of, you have to watch what they say because words are powerful. Donald Trump said a bunch of things about Mexicans, about Muslims, about black people, and his policy has matched the same kind of hateful rhetoric that he spoke. Roseanne was doing the same thing for years and wasn't apologetic until she got in trouble. And then she tried to blame Ambien. So
Cabot, I want to ask about because you mentioned the cancellation, because I think there's an important distinction between saying that someone should not even be able to say something, because that's the First Amendment. We all have the right to say things, but you don't have the right to have advertisers then want to sponsor you and to pay for that sort of content. So I think that's an important distinction that's lost in this debate, first of all. But I guess my question is, you mentioned in Hollywood the sense, and I mean, I've said this on the show, Clay and I fight about this a lot, about whether there's a bias against conservatives in Hollywood. Do you think there's an even accountability commercially as it relates to a liberal product versus a conservative product?
I don't know if there are specific product differences and how it's branded. I do know that there is a huge portion of America that feels that the only conservatives they ever feel represented in media are, portrayed as rednecks and stupid and racist and all of those things. And I think it actually can backfire when people who are in power portray, an entire segment of society as those negative things. It empowers those people, and they begin to say, well, if you guys feel this way about us, then we don't need you. And I think that it does two things. One, it empowers them, and I think for anyone wondering how Donald Trump was elected, it's because there was a large segment of society that felt disenfranchised and felt underrepresented. And also what it does, I think it financially, a lot of these companies are missing out on huge amounts of money because there is a huge market for products that are, you know, portraying conservatives like the normal people they are.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I actually want to like just give you an olive branch because as an African American, as a person of color, we are always fighting about the lack of representation in Hollywood. When you see a black person in a movie or in a TV show, they're like the best friend of the main star, or they're the magical Negro that guides the white person somewhere into the future. Or if you're an Asian person, you don't see yourself at all. And if you do see yourself, you're desexualized, you're emasculated, and you're not an important component of the story. And you saw what happens when you give proper representation to people of color with Black Panther. Yeah. You know, I went to go see the movie 5 times just to send a message because I'm like, we need more movies like this.
So it sounds like you're agreeing with him.
I think we have an agreement
here. It sounds like you're agreeing with him.
We're going to leave it right there. Awesome.
Thank you very much, both of you, Cabot Phillips and Stanley Fritz. Thanks for coming back, Stanley. You come back too, Cabot.
Absolutely.
Thanks. So joining
look at
us
that agreement.
next,
You love to have
I know.
You love to have a come to Jesus.
Yes. So joining us next is my friend Erica Jedinak. She is the New Jersey State Director coming back to us. She is the New Jersey State Director for Americans for Prosperity. We got a quick video about some context of what she's been working on. Let's play that real fast. And there's no sound. Well, I can narrate this for you. There should be a narrator talking about the fact.
They do not teach heroin.
There she is.
It does not involve cutting people's hair or chemicals. It is perfectly safe.
All right.
Okay, Erica,
well,
you have to explain that to us because we only heard half the audio.
That didn't work. Yes, please, Erica, what was that video?
That's okay. Thank you for having me. So it's a really incredible story in the state of New Jersey. Professional hair braiders have to get a full cosmetology license, even though it's not even taught in cosmetology school. And it can cost up to $20,000. And so a lot of these women are operating shops in our inner cities without a license, being fined over $10,000 by the state of New Jersey. Some of them have even rented licenses from gangs in places like Newark. And so we're working on a piece of legislation that would overturn it.
Okay, so that's baffling to me. I mean, it makes it. These are the things we were talking about with Scotty before. Like, does anybody want to get anything done? This seems like something that would be pretty easy to pass. Is there opposition to it, and where is it coming from?
And you've been working on this since 2016. So why did it take 2 years? This seems so common sense.
It does, and some of these women have been working on this for up to 19 years. I started about 2 years ago approaching legislators, hosted a lobby day down in Trenton, and there are cosmetology schools opposing the legislation, although it passed out of the assembly unanimously, thankfully, yesterday in New Jersey. But schools can profit, right? There's certain special interests involved so that they get more students, even though they don't teach African-American style hair braiding.
Is this something that happens, is this a New Jersey specific thing, or are there issues like this elsewhere?
It's across the country. So I believe it's about 22 states have passed repeals of this type of law, but it's roughly half of states still have this very archaic licensure.
And were the licensures, were they passed because they were, I mean, we know Jim Crow, things explicitly, laws were created with racial bias in mind. Was that part of what was created here, or was it a business thing where people just wanted to price out, and incumbents wanted to protect themselves? Why were they passed in the first place?
I think it's some of both, actually. There was a recent interview of a former cosmetology board member. He was an old white barber, to be honest, and he was interviewed, and he said, well, why don't they just come apprentice for a barber like me?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that there are times when people, I mean, it's hard to make a law at any point that is going to satisfy everyone. And I imagine that when this law I think people will agree that cosmetologists should probably be licensed. They're dealing with chemicals, they're dealing with, but people who aren't using those chemicals, who aren't using sharp tools, probably shouldn't. But I imagine it's one of those things that people just didn't think about when they made the law. But the fact that it took almost 20 years to fix it is problematic, and I think is indicative of the fact that people just don't get anything done. And then you have special interest groups like the schools and perhaps other cosmetologists who are standing in the way of these obvious changes that we could have fixed. We talk about this all the time. There are laws right now that we passed Obamacare. They're fixes that I think everyone agrees could be made, but instead it's more politically expedient to just fight about it. And this is probably an example of that, where it's a smart law, but we needed to fix something, and we just took too long to do it.
Well, I want to ask you about working across the aisle, because Americans for Prosperity, it tends to go for more conservative causes. In full disclosure, I did some work with one of their sub-brands last year. But you said this was a unanimous bill. How was it working across the aisle for you guys? Was there reluctance from any Democrats or liberals to say, hey, we are not sure if we trust you? Did you feel any apprehension? What was that process like working bipartisan?
Sure. So I would say it was about a year's process of developing relationships. Also, a lot of the activists we've worked with, right, brought them into the State House to personally tell their story. I would always say, I'm making the introduction here. These women speak for themselves. And so it was incredibly rewarding to be able to empower a lot of these women to share their stories. They had not been heard before. They had been contacting previous governors and senators and assembly members and never been heard before. So a lot of it was just speaking to the right people down in Trenton to have their stories heard. As far as working across the aisle, we pride ourselves in doing that, right? It's actually within our, wheelhouse at Americans for Prosperity to work on all kind of economic freedom issues so that everyone can live their version of the American dream, work with people from all walks of life. And there's a number of really burdensome licensing measures in the state of New Jersey that create barriers to opportunity.
So this one passed through the Assembly yesterday. What's the next step? Does it go to the governor now, or has it gone through both chambers? When's it go into effect?
Yes, so we have to get it to the Senate, which we expect in the next couple weeks, and to the governor's desk. So far, it's all moving very smoothly.
There's support in the Senate to pass it?
Yes, and we were just so excited that it was unanimous yesterday. And I was personally down there with a lot of these women. Brigitte Nazali, like I mentioned, has been working for about 19 years on this issue. And so there were just cheers. It was fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you for thank you for finding some of these things that need to be fixed and fixing them.
Yes,
appreciate it, Erica.
That's what she does.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I'll say it's frustrating that nothing. I mean, that seems like certain things are shouldn't be not be debated, and what do you expect? It's politics. It's politicians. Oh, goodness. Let's lighten it up a little bit. Let's bring in our next guest, Ari Shaffir. He's a comedian with a whole range of credits. He's got a 2-part Netflix comedy special. He's the host of a Comedy Central's This Is Not Happening. Ari, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I think we got some. I think we've got some of your material here. Some boundary pushing stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to be able to play on this.
Well, it's got a political angle. So.
And what about politics?
I don't give a shit.
You don't find it a great
I really don't care about politics.
Of
some people
material?
do. I don't. I think the system is corrupt. Every time I'm walking on the street, somebody's like, hey, vote for so-and-so. I'm like, it's all corrupt. Anarchy is the only way we're going to change anything. Violence. Kill a politician. That's the only way you can change shit.
What? Yeah. I mean, obviously you're joking.
No.
Are you serious?
Yeah, voting is not going to make a difference. It has never. Not in 100 years.
So what would you like to see?
I'd like to see some politicians start getting murdered and reform this government.
Oh my God.
Into one that's not corrupted. I'd like to get business out of government, and they're not going to do it. So the only way to do this is start killing people.
Okay, well, so I'll agree with the first part.
Dude, that guy was so lost. He was just like, wait, that's not the kind of interview I'm doing.
I'll agree with the first part, that the's way too much corruption.
You're all crooked, bro. You know it.
I'll agree with that, but I think that I may not co-sign the rest of what you said. But it brings up it brings up an interesting question, though, because I mean, you're a comedian, and so I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and ask you not to tell me I'm wrong, that you were joking there, and that you were making, you're being incendiary.
Yeah,
that's because that's what comedians do.
My jokes are based on reality.
No,
based on real views.
I think historically that a lot of changes have happened because of violent uprisings. This is true. I mean, the American Revolution was a violent uprising. I'm not saying I agree with him.
Arab Spring, look how much better they got it now.
I disagree, though, because I do think democracy can make fundamental changes. We saw, I detest Hamas, but Hamas was democratically elected in Gaza.
I don't want to talk about the politics of it. I want to talk about what was about the tone and how we're seeing that type of stuff happen in public now, because comedians have a role to entertain.
Yeah,
you do a great job of that. But where's the line? Is there a line at all? I'm not asking you whether you crossed it or not. That's not the point there.
Oh, dude, that was promoting a Comedy Central show. They got so mad at me. They're like, do not promote the murder of politicians while you're telling people to watch our network.
But they didn't cancel your show.
No, they didn't.
And they did cancel Roseanne's. Now I'm not defending either statement.
Yeah.
But I guess we saw what happened with Roseanne this week, or last week. I get so confused. And then at the same time, within the same few days, we saw Samantha Bee make a comment on her show on TBS.
That was attack on anger. Well, they weren't really mad at her. They were just like, I guess we're supposed to be mad at you too a little bit.
And maybe some people believe that, and I may happen to agree with it in part. But there is clearly going to be, and Carrie's going to jump in a second with her bias thing, and I'm going to let her do it. But,
I love this question. I know what you're going to ask.
But there is a line somewhere, and I don't think that. Does it move for different parties? Does it move for different viewpoints?
Yeah.
Does it move at all?
Yeah, for sure. The needle moves back and forth. But the cool thing is now we're so sensitive that comedy clubs have become these like counterculture areas again, where they're all in dark basements. It's cool again, man. You go to a comedy club and you might hear some stuff. You're like, what the F did I just say?
You can say fucking here.
Okay, can I really?
But seriously though, if we start sanitizing comedy,
it becomes
it's either going to go underground or it's going to be boring as hell.
Oh.
You know, so do we not need to forgive certain things? I'm going to let Carrie jump in with her thing because I know it's coming, and then I'm going to we'll debate her. Go ahead.
Well, no. I guess it's similar to what I said in the other segment about there's First Amendment versus commercializing something. Different things.
Yeah.
So are you saying, like, I guess my question for you is, where do we draw the line? Where do we monetize versus not monetize something?
I think a lot of times they end up canceling stuff because they're afraid they might lose sponsors. I mean, Ellen didn't get canceled when her character came out of the closet, but she lost a few sponsors. Nabisco was like, I can't be a part of a gay.
Right.
But like, no one's boycotting Nabisco for doing that, and they've never issued an apology for it. Well, it doesn't matter because no one's coming after them. But if they get enough people saying we won't buy your stuff, they'll be like, fine, we'll back down now.
So why do you think ABC backed down, or why do you think ABC backed down and TBS didn't, for example?
Well, there was already. Well, there's like it's easier to crap on a right wing person than a left wing person.
Jump on a girl. Go for it.
It's just way easier time right now.
That's exactly what I've been saying for 15
They were
years.
shitting on her before for just because she said her character voted for Trump, and there was a big outrage, like how dare you? And then you watch the episode, and it was just no one had any political motivation except two characters. One voted for Trump, one didn't, and that was it. And I was like,
do you think that there is a difference? I'll ask both of you. Because Carrie will have an answer. Do you think that there's a difference in Samantha Bee's situation because she was actually in her show, she was performing, and Roseanne was in her private time, not on the show?
Yeah, because Roseanne, it was her own ambient-induced whatever. I don't know if I believe that, but it was her own tweet versus Samantha Bee. This was highly produced, editors, scriptwriters, producers. I mean, everything, graphics, whatever.
Yeah.
That this was a very deliberate, team effort versus just a one-off from
yeah, but they're different things. I would say that we should really start looking at people's actions over their words or intended jokes.
Just said that.
It's just like, come on, guys. You're right. When she had Roseanne in the beginning, she put Sandra Bernhard on television. She put gay characters on TV. She was like
before Ellen did.
Yeah, a frontier, a pioneer at that. And then it's like we're just going to ignore that because of like.
Do you worry about
really not actions?
Do you worry about the what being censored as a comedian? Do you worry that in the future we're becoming so? Because I agree with you, we're becoming so sensitive. Everybody it's. I could be offended by that skirt if I wanted to. Right now, it's easy.
Oh, remember when they got the chick from Avengers, whatever her name is, the real hot one.
You're asking the wrong
I'm
one.
triggered. Hashtag Me Too on set. What?
Whatever her name was, but then they got on her because she was supporting some company that came out of Israel, and they're like, you support murders of Palestinians. So she was like, wait, what are you talking about? I just like juice.
Was it Jessica Alba?
No.
Oh, I don't know.
We're so easily offended. Does it worry you for? Does it worry you for your profession that you're going to have to be sanitized?
What worries me is that young comics coming up now are so afraid to touch the line because they're afraid they're going to get ousted. That like they can't figure out what the line is, and then then it becomes pap and boring.
But at the same time, sometimes touching the line. Sorry, Carrie, sitting here didn't help. Sometimes touching the line gets you more. I mean, Michelle Wolf sat right the.
She's the best. She took it right to those motherfuckers.
And now she's on.
She's on every bus stop here in New York.
Does it help?
Exactly.
And this is where I would say that the hypocrisy, the bias. Roseanne ain't on no buses here in New York anymore, but Michelle Wolf's everywhere. It's a complete double standard. It's a tale of two comedians. If you're a liberal, you never need to be afraid if you're a liberal. Your young liberal comedians never need to be afraid.
Oh, it's the worst.
And here's the thing is like,
they don't take any chances, man. It's so boring. They're like, don't you guys hate Trump? And everyone claps and it's like, way to take a stance.
Well, okay, here's
Isn't
my question
racism
for you.
wrong? And everyone claps.
Here's my question for you. Did entertainment Hollywood comedians help pave the way for Trump by normalizing vulgarity, by normalizing? So when the Billy Bush tape came out, and when things that were from the Howard Stern show, just really crass, vulgar, disgusting things that Trump had said over the years, do you think that entertainment and entertainers, you have any responsibility to
you personally?
No, just in general.
No, we're a reflection of society. Art is a reflection. We're just a mirror. So
only
people,
a mirror? So you're not a shaper. You don't shape it at all.
No.
It's not a dual role.
We shape what comedy is, but we don't shape. We're just, if people don't laugh, if you do a joke that's based in, when I started, just saying gay was like, haha, everybody's right. That won't get a laugh anymore. Crowds have been like, that. We won't laugh at that. You need to like have a second layer on that. Being gay is not a funny thing anymore. So they stop laughing. So comics have to stop doing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It reflects what people actually believe already.
I think it shapes it too. I
people
think it's both.
Watched the Kardashians years before Trump was elected. We became a garbage society
Please
decades
don't tell
ago.
me the Kardashians are shaping our culture. Well,
First of all, I'd like to apologize in front of you for wearing that shirt on that interview. I was embarrassed at how iron that was and how gross that was compared to such a stylish dude. Sorry.
I do worry about how sensitive we're becoming, and I think that some of them. I mean, Lisa Lampanelli is a good friend of mine, and let's not talk about touching the line. I mean, she.
Yeah, if you don't have a couple of people walking out, you're boring.
Yeah, fair enough. Not many people walk out on you, do they?
Yeah, all the time.
Well, then
Yeah,
that's
I love hearing about it. Yeah.
That's a point of pride for you. Okay. Well, you can find Ari's. Find Ari's Netflix special. It was put out June of last year, but you can still see it.
It's out right now.
Netflix,
and Ari shapes culture. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Let's watch this beautiful sunset you guys have going on right now.
Thanks for joining us. We're doing okay on time. How are we doing? Look at that.
We started late.
10 minutes late. We're going to end a little
Yeah.
bit late.
All right.
But it's all good. Our next segment, our final segment, is our Bookster segment every week. Bookster's a site for book lovers and much more. And Mike Lux is here with us today with a very interesting book called How to Democrat in the Age of Trump. How to Democrat in the, I didn't know it was a verb.
It's an interesting cover.
Yes.
Yes.
But he's going to talk about what's been going wrong with Democrats for the last decade, and let's see how much we agree or disagree. Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
I will agree with the premise from the top that there have been some things that my party has not really done very well. What made you want to write this How to Democrat? What was the impetus for this book?
Well, this is stuff I've been thinking about for a long time. I've been in Democratic politics for my whole life, but I've also been in progressive politics, more movement outside politics. And the problem, I think, for Democrats has been they haven't had guts to join the two together. They haven't had the guts to take on the hard issues, race, class, political correctness, some of those issues. And so I think we've been slipping as a result of that. I think Democrats' message needs to be more about bringing working people together and having a message that will work for everybody rather than avoiding certain hot topics.
So I found in your book you said that you think that the right has hijacked the word freedom. Explain that.
Yeah, I think what the right has done is I say that they've wrapped themselves in it as much as they wrap themselves in the flag, and they talk about freedom all the time. To them, though, freedom means the freedom to the freedom from government. Their definition of they say anything that's government is bad, and therefore we're for freedom because we're against government. But what it comes down to, and what I argue in the book. Since your last guest said "motherfucker," I figure I can swear
yes.
too.
Harry cusses.
I think what it comes down to for the Republicans and the right is that freedom is freedom to be an asshole, freedom to pollute the water, freedom to fuck up the climate, freedom to treat your workers like shit. Freedom to do whatever you want to do to whoever you want to do it to, and not have anybody.
No, but at the same
anything.
time, and I'm not saying I don't agree with you, but at the same time, I think the other side would say, but being a progressive, because I have, ironically, most of my friends in New York are conservatives, so I have conversations like this all the time, and I had one not too long ago with a good Republican friend of mine, and from her perspective, while I might feel all that, she feels that being a Democrat means freedom to take away, to get away, to get paid for not working, freedom to not have to work, freedom for the government to take care of you. I mean,
freedom to take money from hardworking business owners.
Okay, well, let's not get crazy. But is there a reason? I mean, listen, I hate. It's hard to ask this question because I kind of agree with what you said. But is that mentality part of the reason why we're polarized, do you think? I mean, there are two schools of thought in both parties, which one says we need to go as far left or as far right as possible, and the other says, you know what, we need to start trying to listen to the other side. What do you think is going to be more effective for Democrats in 2018 and 2020?
Well, I sometimes talk about that America has got this fever, and we've become kind of, fever dreams, kind of crazy in terms of our hatred of each other and the way we attack each other. What I believe is that America can be more united if we focus on the needs of regular working folks, and that to me includes small business, by the way. And I have a whole chapter in the book on small business and how Democrats and progressives should be in common cause with small business as part of working America. In that there's a bunch of big monopoly companies that are sort of controlling the entire economy right now, and what Democrats ought to be for is helping the small business folks compete with those big monopoly companies.
So
we ought to be helping the small bookstore compete with Amazon. We ought to be helping small.
I think Trump would agree with that.
He might. I mean, I don't disagree with Trump on everything, although he changes his mind from day to day. So I might agree with him on one day and not the very next. But I do think that we need to be reaching out to folks in rural America. When I say we, the Democrats in small business community, working class folks of all races and creeds.
Well, and so I want to ask you about that because you worked on President Clinton's campaign in '92. I would make the argument, this is my argument, that Bill Clinton helped turn the Democratic Party more to the middle, that it had gone so far left under Carter, and then you had the Reagan years and the H.W. Bush years, that it took Bill Clinton, who was a Southern Democrat, who talked about welfare reform, who talked about it, just to bring in overall a more conservative sense to the Democratic Party. That's my sense. And so how do you square that within your book? You said the way to win is to tie racism and economics directly together. When I read that as a conservative, I'm like, wow, he really wants to divide people by race and class, and that's a winning message, which to me seems the opposite of what Bill Clinton did.
Well, I think what Bill Clinton did, and I was part of Bill Clinton's campaigns and White House, and I think what Bill Clinton did, he had some very good instincts about bringing people together, but I also think he drifted. In the beginning of the administration, we were very strongly for small business. And I'm sure you hated the health care plan, but if you actually looked at the details of the health care plan, we went out of our way to make sure that it worked for small business, that it cut health care costs for small business. In part we did that by hurting big business a little bit more, but it was a great bill for small business. But over the years, we got more into deregulating bigger businesses and focusing more on bigger business, the deregulation of the media industry, the deregulation of Wall Street, as two examples. And so some of this is left-right, but some of this is power versus lack of power. And my argument is that Democrats ought to be the party of the people, the party of the folks who have less power. In terms of your race question, here's what I'm suggesting in the book, that what Democrats ought to be saying is, look, folks like Trump are trying to divide people by race. And I believe that's true. You may not agree with me, but I think Trump goes out of his way to divide people by race. And I think he's doing it so that his friends can pick people's pockets. And I do believe that that's a powerful message. I don't think it's a divisive message. I think it's just true.
Well, let me ask this, because the title, I'm fascinated by the title, because how to be a Democrat? I mean, because it's a great question. It's a very great question.
It's a verb.
But the Democrats.
Well, I wanted it to be a verb because Democrats should be in action. We should be moving. We should be doing things.
Okay. Well, then to that end, there's certainly a pretty strong school of thought within the party now that the best strategy for success is to go against Donald Trump, is to be anti-Trump.
Resist.
And you mentioned resist. Thank you. You mentioned that you find times that you happen to agree with him on certain days, and I do too. I find times that I do as well. And I think maybe possibly one of those places might be in some of the trade policies that he's toyed with. He's discussed some of the big businesses like Amazon. I mean, he only hates Amazon because he doesn't like the guy who owns it. but he talks about those things, and I will agree that I think a lot of that is why he attracted some of those working class voters in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania.
I think that's right.
But Democrats are really having a hard time. At least I think a lot of them are having a hard time saying when he's right. Is it necessary? I mean, is it necessary for Democrats when the president happens to, and I can't think of that many examples, but when he does happen to do something that progressives agree with?
I'll give an example. Like in the State of the Union, when he talked about historic low unemployment for Black and Latinos, none of the Democrats stood up and clapped for that.
It's a lot more effective when I say it because you sound like you're bitter.
I'm giving you an example.
You sound like you're bitter. Let me do it. But I do remember Elizabeth Warren specifically and Bernie Sanders. Right, but you sound bitter when you do it. I'm just being honest here.
Well, I'm not a singer like you play.
The difference that is that Bernie Sanders specifically said, well, maybe tariffs should be a part of our discussion. Elizabeth Warren said maybe tariffs should be a part of our discussion.
And Sherrod Brown's been saying that.
But a lot of Democrats who probably would agree with those things have been so staunchly in the corner of whatever he says, resist it, that I fear that they're not going to help themselves. We're not going to help ourselves. What's the strategy? What do you think is more important?
I really agree with you on that. And I talk in the book about how we can't just be the party of resistance. We can't just be the party of anti-Trump. We have to have our own agenda. It has to be focused on working Americans, working families, and helping those families build a better life. When I talk about freedom, what I think the definition of freedom is the freedom to lead a good life, the freedom to build a good life for your family and for your kids, for your grandkids, the freedom to have economic independence, the freedom to have to not be to not be pushed down by big business. If you're a small business person and you can't compete with these big businesses, you ought to have the freedom to be able to compete. And so my argument is that we need to have our own agenda, and we can't just be anti-Trump. If Trump, on the occasional days that he says something right, for 24 hours at least, we can go ahead and agree with him.
And there are times that I think we should put it in our plan. I mean, the things that he says, if he feels that, I still think that deep down he's a closet progressive, and he's not.
He donated to tons of Democrats.
So when he lets his
true
colors show for those 24 hours, I'm with you. We need to.
Well, hopefully Nancy Pelosi can get your hands on your book, and come up with a proactive message that's substance based. I like those debates.
I think that's right. I think we do need a proactive agenda, and I think we are a far better party, far more powerful, far more able to talk to folks if we really are talking about the issues that we care about and the values that we have.
Well, from your mouth to leadership's ears.
Chuck and Nancy.
Mike Lux, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
How to Democrat in the Age of Trump. You can find more information about that on Bookster. You can find it on Amazon, all that stuff. I'm going to take that copy with me today. And we thank you very much, Mike, for joining us, and we thank you very much for joining us and bearing with us with our delay this morning and our little bit overrun. But we had fun anyway, lots to talk about.
Yes, and keep the conversation going in the comments. Make sure to share the episode with your friends. Tag your friends if you think they would find the conversation interesting or maddening, whatever.
We do
Make
that.
sure, yes.
Lots of maddening. Big news for Bold Life.
Yes. She announced on the show, and then we put out a press release this week. Our new host officially has been named, Diana Falzone. She's lovely. Make sure you tune in for 12 o'clock noon here just in less than an hour. Join the conversation for Bold Life and Bold Business on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. See you there.